So, ladies and gentlemen, for our next session, every nation has a moment when it must decide. It has to decide whether it will consume the future or it will invent it. And for India, that moment runs through R&D. And this is a session that will bring together voices that are very deeply invested in rebuilding that foundation. So please join me in welcoming onto our stage Ashish Dhawan, founder and CEO of the Convergence Foundation. And guiding this very important conversation, we also have with us Krishnakumar Natarajan, co-founder, Mindtree and managing partner at Mela Ventures. Over to you, gentlemen.
Check. Yeah. Good evening. It's good to see after so many very interesting sessions at 5 p.m. such a packed audience in this hall. And I think the topic of discussion, India's R&D, can it remain incremental or should it really think more ambitiously in terms of global impact, is so very relevant in the current context. And I can't think of anyone more appropriate than Ashish to have this conversation because he's been an ace capital allocator as well as in his initiatives in terms of building a different educational ecosystem in Ashoka University. He brings in a very different perspective. But just to put the context in perspective, is there a choice in terms of saying we'll be incremental on how we drive our R&D efforts? I think in the current geopolitical context, it's not a strategic choice. I think for countries to start owning key technologies, it's almost a strategic imperative. Assuming if that is the choice ahead over the next decade, as a country, are we positioned well even to think how we're going to do it? And just to throw some numbers here, India's spend on R&D is 0.6% of GDP. And if you compare this with China, which is somewhere in the 2.7, 2.8%, US is 3.5%. And South Korea, being a very small country, spends 4.9% of its GDP in R&D. No wonder that in many industries, they have global brands and global businesses. So, Ashish, in a way, just to start this, you have built probably one of the most successful and admired PE companies, Chris Capital, and you have been an ace capital allocator. And if we had to change this funding architecture, this 0.65% urgently needs to move at least to 2%. And today, if you look at private companies' investment in R&D, it's just 36% of the total. Whereas if you look at any developed economies like the US or Israel, it runs north of 70%. How do you think the country needs to fix this funding architecture?
Yeah, no, thank you. No, thank you for having me. I think this is a very appropriate moment to be having this discussion for a variety of reasons. Of course, you mentioned geopolitics and the need for strategic autonomy. But I think it's also India's stage of development. We are now a lower middle income country at about $3,000 per capita income. If we have to punch through middle income trap, which countries fall into middle income trap typically in the $5,000 to $10,000 per capita, the only way you get out of it is through investment in R&D, investment in technology, higher productivity, becoming a product nation, etc. And it doesn't happen overnight. It requires an investment of a decade or two to get there. So it's the appropriate time. By the way, if you look at China, China grossly underinvested in R&D in the 1990s. They were growing very rapidly after 1979 when they opened up. For 2 decades, they grew very rapidly, doing basic stuff, bringing garment manufacturing, food processing, electronics assembly, a variety of basic things to China. But then, as they hit sort of around 2000, they started to invest much more in R&D. And in fact, between 2000 and 2020, corporate R&D in China went up 100x over the course of 2 decades. So India, I think, is sitting at that moment where our per capita income, we're in lower middle income. We need to make these investments now. We also have, I think, now the sort of government that's woken up to the fact that, in this era where anything can be weaponized, and we are a large market. I mean, if we were a small little country, even with a higher per capita income, like Thailand, we may not have the absolute dollars to make the investment. We have the talent, we have the market size, we have the budget allocation, we have a diaspora, we have a lot of incumbent advantage to make this happen, much like the Chinese did. So I think it's the right time to see how, as you said, Indian R&D today is 0.65% of GDP. It's a pittance. It needs to get to closer to 2% by 2035. Now, the only way it'll get there is if corporate R&D, which is today 0.25% of GDP, which is $10 billion, gets to something like 1.5% of GDP by 2035. If we have a $10 trillion economy at that point in time, that means we need corporate R&D to go from $10 billion to $150 billion, a 15x over this next decade. And I think that's really the question. I mean, government is doing its part. Unfortunately, a lot of government R&D, other than ISRO and a few other bodies, has not been very effective. So I think government is also taking a different approach through entities like ANRF, through RDIF. We can talk more about that. Because I'm not convinced that government line department spending is necessarily going to become more effective unless they change the way they operate. More into challenge grant mode, getting out of the GFR, the finance rules that government has, thinking much more about how we leverage procurement. So I think it's an interesting moment where government has woken up. We've seen a number of announcements in the budget over the last year or two. And corporates, I think, are waking up because of strategic autonomy, but also because trade barriers are coming down, technology is changing, they need to be more competitive.
Which brings us to an important point. I think you're really stressing the point that private investments need to come in this. I know you've started some efforts in terms of getting Dr. Vijay Raghavan as a part of your team, trying to get this going. What have you seen as early signs? Because to be honest, when I get to talk to corporate leaders, I think this mindset of getting incentives to do R&D is very deep. So what is the incentive which the government is giving for us to invest in R&D? So people need to move out of that mindset saying, I don't do something necessarily just for incentives, but because this is really the future. So what has been your early signs which you've picked up? What do you think is working in terms of increasing the industry-academia collaboration?
So we started a foundation called the Foundation for Advancement of Science and Tech. Varun Agarwal, who's an MIT grad, and I started it. And Dr. Vijay Raghavan is on our board. And one of our co-panelists, Ram Gopal Rao, who was supposed to be here, is also on our board. So what we are seeing is that, the earlier incentives given to corporates didn't work. Earlier, there was a 200% deduction for R&D. Honestly, it didn't lead to R&D. All it led to was rebadging. People did funny accounting, took the incentive, but didn't genuinely make an investment in R&D. I think today, in a few sectors, it's happening because it's existential. So if you look at the auto sector, where there's a transition from ICE to EV, where trade barriers now are coming down with the India-EU FTA and what's likely to happen with other countries, UK, etc. So look at the Mahindras. M&M today has about 5,000 people in R&D. Tata Motors, a similar number. Bajaj Auto, I think, has about 1,500 people in R&D. Ather has 1,000 people in R&D. So I think these companies have woken up to the fact that it's existential now. If they don't do it, they're going to fall way behind. And by the way, BYD has more than 100,000 people in R&D. So if you're going to compete with R&D with BYD, you better step up your R&D investment significantly. Similarly, you know, as India has started to indigenize solar manufacturing, you know, modules, cells, wafers, ingots, the whole value chain, I think we soon realize you can bring the manufacturing here, but you can fall behind very quickly because solar cell efficiency is going to dramatically change in the next decade. And so you'll be stuck with stranded assets if you don't invest in R&D. So I think, again, in that sector, those who are making the investments are suddenly saying, I also need, I mean, you've seen Reliance actually go out and buy some companies because they want to invest in R&D. They've engaged with academia. So I think there are some sectors where it's now existential. So you have to do it. There's no choice. There are other sectors where there's a catch-up. So like in defense, our companies didn't qualify, you know, and that's why we had to buy from abroad. But I think now our procurement norms are changing where we are giving some concession for startups, making it easier. Entities like IDEX have come up. So the ecosystem is opening up. Same thing with space, with in-space opening up. So I think sectors like that, there's a greater openness on the procurement side, on the facility sharing side, in terms of encouraging more startups with grants and money, equity investment being made. And then some others, I think, you know, we need a startup ecosystem now to really, and I think money will make a huge difference. What made a difference, by the way, in China is China started a bunch of guidance funds about 15 years ago. And guidance funds are state-sponsored funds for deep tech, where either it was a fund of funds, which gave money to deep tech funds in China, or it was a direct investment vehicle of the Chinese state. So Chinese guidance funds have, over the last 15 years, mobilized about $1 trillion.
Wow.
A trillion with a T. So I think India has just started with RDIF, the RDI fund, which was announced by the finance minister in the budget last year, where basically we are allocating about 1 lakh crore, which is $11 billion. And essentially it's like a guidance fund. This will be like a fund of funds. It'll essentially fund through a fund of funds vehicle, deep tech funds up to 50%. And then the other 50% has to be raised through limited partners outside. It'll also make money available on a concessional basis as loans. So like a 3-4% interest rate, 12-year bullet repayment. So very concessional debt for larger companies that don't need equity. And again, the idea is the fund puts in 50%, the corporate puts in itself. So I think this new vehicle, there was a recent call for proposal, you are aware of it, where they asked AIFs and FROs and NBFCs and DFIs, there are 4 vehicles, 4 categories, to apply. And almost 200 applications came in. The largest being from AIFs, about 3/4 from AIFs. So it basically funds like yours or many others saying, we want to raise a deep tech fund, and we're now applying to get money from you. So I think it's good to see, and I've talked to many people who don't have deep tech funds today, who are running a regular fund, who are now setting up a deep tech fund because 50% is being underwritten or could be underwritten by this new vehicle. So you may be familiar with Yozma. Yozma is a vehicle created by the Israeli government in the 90s, not that long ago. I mean, about 35 years ago. The Israelis started Yozma. And Yozma is basically a fund of funds, only with $100 million at that point. And then they did subsequent doses. And that Yozma really is what incubated the deep tech funds in Israel. It was like a fund of funds. So I'm very hopeful that we'll see, you were telling me that maybe there are 50, 60 deep tech funds in India today. If I had to venture a guess, I think through this stimulus, we should see 300, 400, 500 deep tech funds in India by 2030.
Absolutely. No, I think one other aspect coming out of it, as long as we can make the mindset change of private investments coming in. But how do we really address the talent issue? Because if you look at the number of PhDs in India, the last when I looked at the data is 1/20th of what is there in the US. Because the basic research mindset itself, we don't encourage, and PhD is not a great option for many people. They really go into it if they don't find other options. What would you think could be done to really enhance that pool of research people? And like you rightly said, maybe in the EV space, maybe a Mahindras and Tatas would require, like BYDs, another 10,000 people, each really having deep research capabilities in batteries and electronic systems and so on. What do we need to do to enhance that pool of research-minded people?
Yeah, so I completely agree with you. Our PhD production is low, and it's also subpar in terms of quality. I mean, there are a few institutions where the PhD output is good, but it's far and few. So Tsinghua, which is the leading Chinese university, has about 24,000 PhDs. Indian Institute of Science, which is our premier research university, is about a tenth of that in terms of number of PhDs. And Tsinghua has high quality PhDs. It's not just a numbers game. So I think that a few things. One is government needs to really overinvest in PhD fellowships at the top 100 universities in India. Forget about the democratizing. I think when the Chinese looked to build great universities, they overinvested in the top 9. They had a C9 program. They then invested a lot in 40 institutions. They had a C40 program through Project 211, Project 985. So you can't democratize. I think you have to pick your winners. There are some places where you will be able to produce good and which you should ramp up capacity because you have faculty advisors, you have the ecosystem to make it happen. So I think at those institutions, we need to do like a 3-4x in terms of number of PhDs in the next 8 to 10 years. Now, that's still going to take a long time. So I think in the near term, we will have to rely on getting diaspora back. So I'm hoping that as all these deep tech funds get stimulated, and as they fund biotech ventures and space tech ventures and hardware ventures and AI ventures, that in those ventures they'll pull in talent from the diaspora and bring them back, or they'll have companies with an office in the US and an office here. So I think tapping into the diaspora is something we need to do actively. We also, through this foundation that I was talking about, have proposed a scheme to the PSA and to the PMO called PM Swagat. It's much like the 1,000 Talents program. So the Chinese had a program called 1,000 Talents where they targeted the really top researchers of Chinese origin in the US to attract them back to China. And we think India needs a similar scheme to make it attractive. Each of those people will be able to attract top-notch PhDs, at least 5 to 10 around them, because they are like magnets. So I think those are some ways in which we can increase not only the number, but the quality of PhDs in India. And then we need a campaign to say, most of our top PhD students or candidates go abroad. I think it's less exciting to go abroad today, given that the number of, openings in academia has come down dramatically in the US. I know of a lot of PhD candidates who are graduating this year and next year who are really worried. So this is the moment to sort of run a campaign to convince people who want to do a PhD that actually you should stay back in India, that there are, top 50 places where you can go where it's almost as good. Do like programs, give those institutions some money so that they can send their PhD candidates to global conferences, send them abroad for a year. So I think we just need to be more generous and recognize that this is a moment where we run a nationwide campaign to convince bright students that you stay in India to do your PhD.
Excellent. There's just one other thing. If you look back in terms of where India has been successful, whenever there's been a mission mode R&D effort like space, I think we've done well. I know the government has made a lot of announcements, like you rightly mentioned, ANRF has a 50,000 crores budget, RDI has a 1,000 crore or 1 lakh crore budget. Then there's an Indian semiconductor mission, which is about 11 billion allocated to it. The National Quantum Mission, again, is 6,000 crores. The India AI mission is 20,000 crores. And then the Center on IoT and thing, that has another allocation. But in your position, what would you advocate to be the governance rails on this? Because it shouldn't be just announcements, it should lead to outcomes.
Yeah, so I think there are a few things. One is these are new. So what I can see is that the governance framework, if you read the way the RDIF is structured, or the ANRF, there are obviously committees that will, it's a challenge grant process. And then there are committees. I'm already seeing out of ANRF, if you look at the first round, because I know at Ashoka University we've gotten grants coming out of ANRF, the selectivity rate was only 8%. Okay. Now I know a lot of researchers in India are complaining because they're used to a higher selectivity rate, but I think it's good.
Yeah.
What that's saying is that the committee is actually being picky and choosy. The flip side is, which is also very good, is the ticket size I'm seeing of each grant is actually bigger. We are now getting 10, 20, 25 crore grants from ANRF versus 1, 2 crore. I think the bane of Indian grant making through DST, DBT, all these grant making bodies was incrementalism. Very small, 50 lakhs, 1 crore, very incremental. I think now we're doing larger ticket. We're often making an institute, a node, and then it's working with others. We still are not as strategic as the Chinese. So we have given money, as you said, in some strategic areas. Yeah. Semiconductor, AI, quantum, IoT. Now through RDIF, they've identified 6, 7 areas,
6, 7 areas, yeah.
Even beyond, a couple of them beyond the ones you talked about.
Yeah.
But I think my own sense is we haven't written a sort of strategy explicitly about what we want to accomplish. I think Make in China 2025 was much more explicit about what they wanted to achieve in that decade from 2015 to 2025. So I would like to see us be somewhat more strategic. I think from a governance standpoint, my hope is the governance will be better in these new bodies. We're also seeing, I know Dr. Shiv Kumar couldn't come, he was supposed to be here.
Yes, he was sick. Yeah.
But it's good that we've got someone from the private sector. He was at Microsoft earlier. He's shifted now to lead ANRF. There's a search committee right now. I'm one of the members of that, along with Chris Gopalakrishnan and some government people, to select the leader for RDIF.
RDIF.
And we have a number of applications from both government, but the private sector also. So I think the governments will be better, but give it time.
Yeah.
I think it's very early. These things are just getting set up. It'll take some time before money goes out of the door and we can actually evaluate to see how effective they've been. And I think for those who care about R&D in India, it behooves upon us to critically examine what these bodies are doing and make suggestions in the first year or two so that they can iterate and really improve. Because the DNA needs to be formed well in the first 2 or 3 years. One thing interesting I'm seeing, KK, is inspired by these. So Ministry of Heavy Industries, for instance, reached out to ANRF saying we want to run a 6,000 crore challenge grant.
Wow.
Can you help us? Similarly, Telecom is just running a challenge grant right now of its own. METI already is doing some challenge grants.
They've done.
So we are seeing that the template of challenge grants is being taken to these others. And I'm hoping that that'll sort of spread through osmosis to other departments as well. Because if you remember in the original conception of ANRF, every ministry or department is supposed to give up 15% of its budget
to
for ANRF.
Yeah.
That never happened because nobody wants to let go of their turf, right? But fine, if they're not letting go of their turf, ANRF, it's a separate body, they recognize it has a certain capacity. Partner with them, as Ministry of Heavy Industries done, or copy their template, as I'm seeing some other industries do, would be very good.
Absolutely. I know we have a minute and a half and getting Ashish is very difficult. Maybe we can throw it open to the audience for maybe 2 questions. If you just put your hand up, somebody will get a mic to you. Yeah, I see a hand there. Can someone get a mic to him?
Right, great discussion. Israel is such a small country. You mentioned one of their schemes, but what did they do to come out with so cutting-edge innovations and cutting-edge startups? So if you can throw some light on that. And can India take some lessons from there?
Yeah, so look, I think there were many things, but I think they had some good enabling conditions. One is a defense sector, because for them it's existential. They've always invested in communications, defense, these sectors, hardware, because it's been critical for them. So they were talking Atmanirbhar and innovation at home long time back, from soon after they were formed. So that ecosystem, they also had some top institutes. The Weizmann Institute, Ben Gurion, there are several, 4 or 5 institutions in Israel that are really top class. They invested in R&D, as KK was saying, a country that actually went to 5+% of allocation to R&D. They had a lot of tech transfer also. You go to Israel, there's a lot of innovation. So a university is not just measured by teaching and research. It's measured in Israel by industry, collaboration, and measured by the innovation ecosystem it spawns. And we never did that. They did that. And then finally, Yozma really kick-started the deep tech funds in Israel. And then they had some winners early on, because there were so many Israelis going back and forth between Israel and the US. They're a small country, they were forced to build for the world. They were not building just for the home market. And these companies got acquired by US companies. This is leading up to the dot-com bubble. There were some big acquisitions, and that really put Israel on the map. And then these VCs got big exits. They were able to raise more money. And the whole ecosystem really, the flywheel started to turn.
We'll probably take that as a last question, if you don't mind. He put his hand up first. And I know I'm already running over time.
A great session. My question is on the deep tech, for example, and on the research. 1 lakh crore is a great fund that has been made available. But if you look at it, countries like we spoke about, US, Israel, South Korea, China, some of these like China and all state-sponsored, South Korea state working along with the businesses. So what is the 1, 2, 3 things that you think that we should do to ensure that the funds are available? Today, resources are available. But what are the 1, 2, 3 things that we should do as a country to ensure that next 5 years, 10 years, we become what we want to become?
So I think that, this 11 billion is a good start, but I don't think it's enough for a country of India's size. So firstly, I think on the fund size and on the incentive side, we should do more. So we have a concept of much like PLI, RLI, research linked incentive. So once in industry, manufacturing comes, like electronics, assemblers, components, and RLI gives them an incentive to do research. So we can have the guidance funds, the RDIF, we can have RLI. Let's think of, we need to put much more money. 11 billion. States should have their own RDIF. So if Telangana wants to stimulate the aerospace sector and defense sector, it should create an RDIF for that sector. If Bangalore and Karnataka wants to stimulate AI and semi-design, it should create its own. So we need much more money. China did it not just from the federal government, it did it at provincial level, at city level, at every level. So money is extremely important. A second is talent, we were talking about. How do we get these PhDs, postdocs? We need to make it attractive for people to come back. We need to increase production. We need to create incentives where faculty can hold equity in a company and do consulting outside, things like that. The Bayh-Dole Act in the US was a game changer because it allowed faculty to have the right incentive to see the upside from these startups, to do translational research. And then finally, we need to work in mission mode much more strongly going forward. It's not just money, It's just focusing the mind with clear targets in 7, 8 strategic areas, like I was saying earlier, so that we can achieve our goals by 2035. And procurement is another area. Sorry, I forgot to mention. We have to leverage procurement as well. You know, all countries that have succeeded, Huawei first got spec'd in China. And then they went to countries in Belt and Road who they could arm twist, and they sold Huawei product. Then they made vendor financing available. The Chinese state backed them with vendor financing to sell their product. And then Huawei's product kept getting better, and it became a global company today with 100,000 people in R&D.
So I think we've really run out of time. And once again, on behalf of Nasscom and the audience, Ashish, thanks a lot. I think your perspectives are extremely interesting in the context of such a key area. And thanks for sparing your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
A big thank you to both of you. Gentlemen, please continue joining us on stage. We would like to present you with a token of our appreciation. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts with so much clarity and conviction. May I please request Ms. Shehani Seniviratne, chairperson at Nasscom, to come and join us to do the honors. Can we have the gifts as well?